her siblings. So one of the things that happens with this pattern of compare and despair, and I see this a lot with teens with ADHD. I think teens without ADHD do it, but because kids with ADHD often come come to the drawing board with a legacy of being told that they're different or feeling that they're different or perhaps feeling misunderstood. They're hard on themselves. They're really hard on themselves. And we know that, as many of you attended my perfectionism webinar, which was, I think, in January now. And if not, I encourage you to check it out. So we know that ADHD and perfectionism can travel together. And the perfectionism can be both motivating, like, oh, I really want to do a good job. And it can also be debilitating. Whatever job I do is never enough. Marcia says our 12-year-old routinely calls herself stupid whenever she doesn't succeed at something new for the first time and gives up easily. I have a client right now who actually won't go and practice, at the batting cages because he believes that, he doesn't want to practice. I think because the belief is that he should already know how to do it or doesn't see the link between practicing and improvement, that he should already be perfect and understand how to do that. Mia says, my son thinks that he needs to be good at everything. This is exactly what I was just saying. Such high expectations for himself, perfectionism. And when he can't meet those expectations, he feels such a sense of failure, even if he didn't have the ability, really have the ability to meet those unrealistic expectations in the first place. So these are all ways in which teens are telling themselves, I'm not good enough. I don't measure up. Um, Now, who are teens? Let's talk a little bit about adolescents because I think if we're talking about compare and despair, we want to see who we are, who we are. Um, so teens have many times, maturing or perhaps more of an adult body, but a younger brain. There's movement away from family bonds into society at large, with continued reliance on adults for safety and happiness, which can create a lot of tension in families and make things tough for parents as well as for kids. Teens are examining their identity. They're trying to figure out who they are. And these are issues related to sexual identity, gender identity, racial and ethnic identity, as well as neurodiversity identity. They're asking questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? What do I believe? Now, a lot of parents ask me, well, what is ADHD and what is adolescence when we're talking about different behaviors or beliefs? And honestly, it's hard to tell. This desire that kids have for autonomy creates conflict. Parents of teens with ADHD actually have been found, according to research, to be more stressed than parents of neurotypical kids. Um, Teens who struggle with executive functioning skills because of their ADHD or and a coexisting disability, or maybe an autism spectrum disorder or anxiety and depression, they have weaker organizational skills naturally. They struggle with time management. They struggle with prioritizing and planning, and as well as focus and recall, goal directed persistence, sustained attention, and emotional and verbal impulse control. And so this means that they require greater parental involvement for longer amounts of time than their peers. And they're aware that they need this help. They honestly can't stand themselves a lot of times because they need this help. And since they don't like themselves for this issue, they're going to be projecting that onto you. I don't like you because I need you to help me. And that's a really hard position for a parent to be in, to be actively disliked when you're just trying to help. And so there's this push pull, from Dr. Doolittle, that push me, pull me animal. This kind of what raising a neurodivergent teen is all about. Neurodivergent teens also express frequent negativity. Their first response can be no. One of my clients, no matter what you ask her, her first response is no. And her parents have wisely followed my suggestion, which is to just wait. Let's wait and see. Because what happens is that the teen actually needs to come to the decision on their own. So they feel like they're exercising their autonomy rather than saying yes immediately. They want to feel like, oh, I've thought about it. And yes, I'm going to do that. So I have some agency here. One of my clients, my former clients, used to call this automatic no as shoot them up and knock them down. Are they being, and we want to ask questions like, are they being contrary or do they actually need time to think and reflect before responding? And that's what I see is, I see both of these things, in kids who struggle with oppositional defiant disorder, we see that contrariness just because. Sometimes kids who have pathological demand avoidance, they're just going to say no over and over. But for a lot of kids, they need a little time to think about it, reflect on it, and somehow make it their own. One of the challenges of this age group is that they really want to have their privacy. They want to have some say in what kind of information you know about them, but they also don't always manage their choices very well or their responsibilities. One of my clients once said to his mother in session, Mom, you are on an as needed to know basis. If I think you need to know, I'll tell you. And we sort of all sat in the room and kind of stunned for a minute, and the mother started laughing, and I was relieved because I started laughing too. Because the problem is that adolescents, and I would say even extended adolescents, those kids who have finished high school and moved on to the next chapter, still rely on adults, on their caring adults for safety, security, and well-being. So, one of the things that I'd love to hear from you are, what is the fine line for you between hovering or being or snow plowing or being a bit of a drone parent and helping? Where do you get stuck? Because it is very tricky. When am I actually helping? When am I sort of hovering above to make sure things are going okay? And when am I following my child around, as in this drone parent kind of lingo to make sure they're doing what they need to do rather than giving them a chance to try it, stumble, perhaps even fail, and learn from that experience. So, if you could put into the chat, what's happening between you and your teen right now. Teresa says my teen won't tell me anything, and this is a very difficult situation. I've been in this situation myself as a parent, and I want to say it stinks because you're so shut out, and you can see that things aren't so great, or you're worried that things aren't great, or maybe you're getting a report from the school that there have been too many absences this semester, and yet it's hard to discuss. So what I like to encourage in families raising teens is to have an agreement that you as a parent get to ask one question per day and they have to give you an honest answer so that there's some type of communication that's happening. You could do it at the table, you could do a high and a low of the day, or as someone once said to me, a happy and a crappy, and everybody can do it. And that can be something that we do as a family. There has to be some information that's exchanged. And part of the reason that you can advocate for that and say this is what we're going to do in our family is because you are still responsible for their health, their well-being, and their safety. So let's see what some of these other comments are. I'm looking forward to reading them. Susan says, I'm so glad my kids grew up just as cell phones were coming in and there was no Facebook. Yes, my kids grew up, they bridged that. They got cell phones and Facebook came into the life of one of my kids more than the other. Helen, I feel so sorry for teens growing up now. They grow up too fast and experience pressure at much earlier than I did at that age. Yes. So with the, intrusion and dependence and um, role of social media on the lives of teens, um, they are sort of thrust into maturity often before many of them can handle it cognitively and emotionally, and it's hard to sort of manage that because you're parenting in a sea of parents whose kids may not struggle in the same way that your child struggles with devices, or who just are more absent and may not care in the same way. Thank you, Julie and Evelyn and Dana. Nice to see you. Teresa, my team won't tell me anything, so we spoke about that. Helen, I try to explain to the parents of the neurodivergent children I work with that boundaries are fine and healthy, but they also need to accept that their child needs some autonomy too. Right. So that's, what we're talking about is a level of engagement where there's some autonomy, but there's also some knowledge about what's happening in their life. And what we want to do is to create a situation where kids can share something that of their choosing rather than feeling like they're being interrogated. And then that helps them feel that sense of agency, which is so important for so many teens. Kathleen, my teen tells me most things. Fantastic. Mia, he used to paint a rosy picture, which was completely different from reality. Thank you for saying that, Mia, because a lot of teens will kind of gloss over the struggles that they're having, either because they're embarrassed, um, because they're embarrassed socially, or they're embarrassed academically. They don't want to disappoint you. A lot of teens that I work with really feel a very strong sense of avoidance of avoiding disappointing a parent, and instead just want that to know that things are fine. And then what happens is things unravel to a place where they're not fine and they haven't talked to you, and that's when things kind of um, go down the drain. Kathleen, my big struggle is telling me the truth about their schoolwork, whether it's done correctly and finished up to par. This is an interesting question because one of the things that I feel like is a constant battle between teens and parents, it has to do with homework and schoolwork and what parents expect of their kids and what kids actually want to do themselves. And it really is a challenge because I do believe that kids' homework has to be their own. And I also can understand that as parents, we don't want our kids to fail. And so I think that what has to happen is actually really a conversation around where the neutral territory is. Some kids, particularly younger teens, could do the homework, but then they'll forget to press the send button or turn it in when they go into class. In which case, that they're showing you that they need more scaffolding and support. What would that look like in a way that isn't going to make them feel infantilized? So that's an important conversation to have, and if it's hard to have that at home without an argument, perhaps that's something to have at school with a school counselor, or if you have a therapist, that's a great conversation to have with them. Evelyn, my preteen gets irritated when I ask or try to help. He will eventually share on his time, not mine. Thank you for saying that, Evelyn, because that kind of backs up what I'm talking about. That kids really want to be able to come to you rather than feel like you're in charge and you're holding the container of their academic performance. We have to, as parents, sort of let that go over time, hand it over to them. And maybe that means your child won't go to Oxford if you live in the UK, or to Princeton if you live in the United States. That's okay. They'll end up at the school that actually will fit them the best. And many kids I work with go to community college for a year or two to, mature, get those executive functioning skills more mature, and then transfer to the state university or somewhere else when they have matured and they have those skills. Dana, gosh, I'm 48, diagnosed in my early 40s, sitting back thinking, I was like that when I was young. Interesting. Thank you, Dana, for sharing. Angelica, my teen doesn't tell me anything either. This is very common. And this is very common. If I ask, I get intense pushback, to put it mildly. I walk on eggshells constantly for fear of triggering an explosion. Thank you for saying that, Angelica. That is so difficult. And you are not alone. Many parents of teens with ADHD, teens who are twice exceptional, teens who are neurodivergent, um, walk on eggshells. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing because of the the dragon breath that they're going to get in response to it. And in some ways what I want to say is, let's put on your Teflon suit and not take these things personally. um, our team's job is to push back, and particularly if we are competent, strong, independent women or men. Our children may see us as who they want to be, and they also may see us as things they themselves will not be able to achieve. And so they want to create space, and they're doing that with that pushback. Again, I think what we need to have is some sort of family agreement about, a level of information. I remember that when my daughter was 14, she didn't want me to know anything about her life. Um, and that really didn't work. And so we came to an agreement that I could ask one question per day that she would answer honestly. And so the day that we started this, I said, hi, what can you tell me a high and low of your day? And she looked at me and she said, no, that's two questions. Which do you want? And I was like, darn, you are right. You caught me. And so, I went with the high because I didn't want to deal with the walking on eggshells about the low. So I really get that, Angelica. Marcia, our 12-year-old therapist says I care too much and has therefore assigned me to be completely hands off of her schoolwork, and that we have to let her fail in order to get her attention. It is so difficult to watch her grades just tank, but at least we have a professional guiding us. In general, she says everything is fine or nothing is wrong. Um, I really respect your therapist, and we often do care too much, particularly our generation of parents, and that would be Generation X and older millennials, um, and some younger boomers as well. And I think though, if you could, somehow institute, one sentence about something that happened in their day, who they sat with at lunch or whatever, you're opening the door to a little bit of a conversation, but not about homework or school. Lots of great comments and questions. Brandy, yes, I have the same issue with my teens regarding schoolwork and telling me it's done, and we find out later there are zeros and then he's behind. So in this situation where kids say, "Yeah, I've got it, I'm good," and then actually they're not good and they're failing, then I think it calls for a different type of intervention, and that would be a conversation with the school about the school counselor about what kind of role you can play or what kind of support your child could get at school that wouldn't involve you but would involve helping them. Do they need a supervised study hall where they're actually getting help, or a supported learning classroom where they're able to do their work? um, uh, or is there a way that you can connect turning in the homework, and earning some screen time or some other privileges? Tina, help. I'm just learning about my ADHD. It's so difficult being 53 and having these same characteristics. I also have an almost 8-year-old with so many symptoms. A book suggests, perhaps. Well, I'm going to suggest my book because why not? What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew. I also would suggest any books by Sari Solden or Linda Rogley or Kathleen Nadeau or Patricia Quinlan. There are many books about women with ADHD, Ellen Littman. Check on the Attitude website. There's also a lot of great resources there as well. Aisha, I try to ask questions and trust that she is telling me the truth. I try to keep calm when she tells me things, even if I don't agree. Now I'm working on her correcting things on her own when she makes a mistake. For example, she set up an Amazon account and attached her debit card info. Amazon took money from her account and she came to me to fix it. I gave her suggestions to try to fix it herself, and she was able to do it. She comes to me now because I respond differently. Woo! I want to say bravo for you, Aisha. That is fantastic. And I love that you're working on her correcting her own mistakes, because ultimately in the course of life you will not be there all the time. And so her learning how to correct her mistakes is really important. Um, Let's see. There's more comments here. He's homeschooled. I love community college. Margaret, I'm worried about what happens after high school. I used to keep him on track, and thank God now he now has an IEP with study skills instructor who keeps him on track. But do colleges offer IEPs? This is a great question, Margaret. And if I had planned better, I would have the cut and paste to put in the slot, because I'm actually offering a webinar on life after high school in a couple weeks. I think it's on May 11th. So please go to my website and sign up, because this is exactly the topic I'm talking about. How to get support for your child in college, how to prepare your child for the transition if they're going to college, and what are other options if that's not in their future. So I hope you'll join me. Eggshells. Brandy, I'm having a hard time with my oldest teen playing the victim rather than being responsible for their actions. It's always someone else's fault. Um, that is really hard, Brandy, and I'm sorry that you're having that. I think that uh, you know, there might be some ways to kind of gently say, okay, well, this person did that. Was there anything that you think you might have contributed to this situation? And just put that out there. And they might be like, no, it wasn't me at all. And they might think, but they might think about it, you know? You can just say, just something to reflect on, because we can't control what other people do. We can only control our response to that. And that's really the position that we want to take. Um, I'm sorry, Janice. Maybe if you could leave and come back, you'd have a better reception. Thank you, Annie. Um, Great. Thank you, Annie. Dana, my mom was too caring like that. Wished she'd let me fail sometimes, because failure was hard to deal with when I got out on my own. Jamie, I'm a community college professor and I don't know the answer to that. Great, I will. Thanks. You're welcome, Margaret. Thank you, Annie, for posting that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about adolescence. So this is a generation, Generation Z. Screens are a defining feature of their social life, their entertainment, consuming material goods, and their education. In 2018, 95% of 13 to 17-year-olds said they had access to a smartphone. What we've found since COVID is that screen time has increased across the board, and it hasn't actually uh, retreated at all. So that's something that we really want to think about. Um, Also, teens are really identifying and looking for their peer group, and they are self-identifying. I'm part of this. I'm part of that. And of course, TikTok has been a really important, and some would say detrimental, way that kids are self-diagnosing. There was actually a really interesting article on attitude. I think it was this week, about by a psychiatrist who was on TikTok to try to counter all the myths and falsehoods about ADHD with real information. Um, I do want to say that I colleges do not offer IEPs because colleges are not mandated in the United States under the same law that high school and elementary schools are, or middle schools, which is the IDEA laws. But because which and the IDEA law says every student should is entitled to a fair and equitable education. The when you go to college, the laws are different and they're governed by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that means that everybody should have access to an education, and that's different. So we want to really look into that. So it's natural when you're a teen and sometimes when you're an adult to compare yourself with others and look for similarities and contrasts as part of identity formation. Social comparisons can be motivating and inspiring or dispiriting and judgmental. They've also been associated with depression. So, social media for in this process of social comparison has been found to have a significant downside in terms of self-esteem, self-image, and well-being, resulting in envy, blame, and lying. Teenagers who are suffering from lower self-esteem or mild depression are more likely to make frequent social comparisons and put themselves on the downside of those comparisons. Now, comparisons can really create a competitive outlook and a feeling like you never measure up. And people tend to compare themselves to people they think are better than they are, or happier than they are, not worse than they are. And so the interesting thing is that on social media, people don't post their deep dark demons, or when they've had really they're feeling horrible about themselves, or they have a terrible breakout, or they're in the middle of their menstrual cycle. They don't post then, right? And so we don't have we have a comparison to an outside image or created persona that actually may or may not be related to who the person is inside. So this is what teens are doing all the time. They're comparing their insides to other people's outsides. Okay. We adults do that too. We compare our insides to other people's outsides. So what are some interventions that we can do? One is to identify islands of competency. So, what does your teen like to do and feel good about doing? We want to grow this good so that they can spend more time doing it, so that they can pay more attention to their strengths. We can shore up their challenges, but we want them to walk away from their adolescence with a sense of what's good about them, what they feel like, yeah, you know what? I am sharing these parts of myself that are unique and wonderful. Um, we want to notice what's going well, when, where, what, and how, and make a little casual statement. Not a whole big party about it, not shining a spotlight on it, but just a little casual statement like, wow, thanks for clearing the table. Or, hey, your history teacher said you've been turning in your assignments. High five. That's awesome. Just low key. Um, we want to talk with our kids about what real friends are. How do you identify a true friend? And how can we help them spend more time with these people and listen to what they have to say about you than the people who are the popular kids or the kids you're constantly going after who don't actually know you and who don't particularly care about you? And this is true, I think, for teens across the board, because it's very tempting to want to be noticed by those so-called popular kids, to be included in them. And and we all have memories, I'm sure, from our own adolescence where we were snubbed or left out or just, you know, operating on a different plane than some of these other people. So, how can we help our kids? For middle schoolers and younger teens, And I think somewhat for older teens, if you know parents who have children who are your children's friends, get together with them. Have dinner. The weather is improving in most of the world right now. We're coming out of winter. Lots of people have plenty of vaccines. Have little get-togethers where it's casual to help kids socialize appropriately. Um, Pay attention to what triggers the comparisons in your kid, and address those. And talk with them if about how to avoid some of those triggers or respond differently. Limit time spent on social media or get rid of apps that make you feel bad about yourself. And that's the thing. It's like the kids will keep these apps on even though it makes them feel terrible about who they are. What would it be like to say, I'm going to get rid of this for a month, and then if I want to, I can go back on it? As adults, we want to model how to accept ourselves for who we are, warts and all. No one is perfect. It's a myth. So we want to talk with our teens about the process, the issue of perfectionism, and this process of comparing your real self to some mythical persona that people have created on Instagram or or TikTok. And finally, we want to nurture an appreciation of what's working in their lives and who cares about them. To look at where they've come from to get to where they are rather than looking sideways at what they're not. So, I would really like it if you would share with me a little bit about how you can help your kids notice what's going well and define friends and identify who they are based on, similar interests or just family bonds. What are some ways to help your kids notice what's going well and what they like about themselves so that they could reduce those comparisons that lead them to feeling bad about themselves? So, if you'd put into the chat some of that, that would be great. I'd love to hear that. I'd also love to hear from you how you've come to accept yourself, warts and all. This is something that many, many of us struggle with. I struggle with it too. I have to remember that, sometimes that I'm doing the best I can with the resources I have in any given moment. And there have been times in my life where I haven't done a very good job. And I've had to live with the consequences of that as a parent or a friend or a daughter. So, how can we hold on to those parts of ourselves? And the way we're going to do that is with some self compassion. We're going to put our hand on our heart and we're going to say, it's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. How can we pivot? Um, Helen says, I get the kids I work with to write down or say out loud something that went well that day or they feel good about. That's great. I love that idea. I think we could have parents take a post-it and every day have a kid write something that went well that day or they feel good about and put it up on the wall for like the panel of positivity. That would really help, or put it up on their bulletin board in their room, or keep it in a journal. There's been a lot of research that shows if you can, pay attention to three good things at the end of each day, that will really shift your perspective into one that's more content. Susan, you want to hug your kids sometimes, but they don't like hugs. Moms and teens problem. Sure. Kids are very clear, they're sort of struggling with where you end and where I begin. And they may not want to have that physical contact. That physical contact might be triggering for them. And maybe you could use some words to express the same thing as a hug, which is to say, I'm giving you a hug right now, even though I know you don't want to be touched. Or I'm sending you some warm, loving thoughts your way, something like that your way. Um, Kids will might you can also ask. your kids, would you like a hug? They may say yes, they may say no. Um, that's okay. So, how have you been able to accept yourself for who you are and model that for your kids? And how are you able to help kids notice what's going well? Can you sit down at your dinner table and do a happy and a crappy, or just a happy, what has gone well today? Because, the neurodivergent brain will tend towards what hasn't gone well, what hasn't been working, because that's um, a lot of the feedback that they get, what isn't okay with me instead of what is. Mia says, have openly accepted the fact that I am neurodivergent, quirks and all, but my kids roll their eyes and say, not everything is about ADHD. I wish I knew how to let them know that it's okay and they are different, but all they want is to be the same as everyone else. I think that's really so profound, Mia, because that is what kids want. Every child, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, wants to be the same as other people. They may feel shortchanged when because they're compared to others. Um, it's disheartening to see someone pick themselves apart, because all the kids are consuming are, idealized and doctored images of how women are supposed to look or how men are supposed to look. Um, that can be really, really challenging. For my family, we often talk about our innate God given talents and strengths and how we use them daily and how it makes us unique. Awesome. We often talk about the strengths we notice in our friends and other family members and reflect on how that makes them unique. That seems so healthy, because so many people are not doing that. So many people are talking about other people's limitations and what they could do better and what's wrong with them, and there's a gossipy aspect to it. So the fact that you're doing this really is shifting the conversation and creating a positive mindset, to pay attention to the things that are working in a person's life instead of the things that aren't working. um, so I would love to know what else you do in your families to try to nurture, that self-acceptance. I think it's helpful to be able for us to say when we make a mistake, it's like, okay, I made a mistake. How am I going to change it? Kathleen says we talk about that it's okay to be different. It is. Most kids feel like being different is not okay. Who wants to be different? We all just kind of want to be the same. I don't want to be the person who's different. I want to be accepted for who I am. I want to be popular and well liked. And sometimes being different means that you're not those things. Sometimes it can be that you're the cool kid who is very funny, or somebody who is, really artistically talented, and that's great. Um, so it's okay to be different, and sometimes kids may not want to be different like everyone else. Kathleen, I think that's very true. Um, I'm sorry, they may not want to be like everyone else. They're happy with being different. There are plenty of kids who are like, yeah, I'm different and I'm so cool with that. That's good. And so I think it's important to support that. It's okay to be different. It's okay that you don't want to be like everyone else, and if you do want to be like everyone else, how can I help you accept that you're different? All of those things are all okay. And they're all part of the process of figuring out your identity as a teenager. And Einstein was pretty different. That's right. And it's great to have some role models for our kids to think about. I'm sure Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was different because he was very tall. And I'm sure that uh, you know, Einstein or Jay-Z or Beyonce, they were all different in some way. And they've, basically, benefited from those differences in their chosen fields. And that's what we would hope for our kids themselves, that they will ultimately be able to use those differences and apply those differences to create a life that is satisfying to them, to create to be able to live fully with their uniquely wired brain. That is our